Some sharks are very big. This is the whale shark, the largest fish on the planet. It's very small microscopic organisms. They grow about 40 feet long. That's about 12.5 meters for the metric out there. And then this little guy called the cigar shark is about the size of a cigar. Wow. They're about half a foot long, 6 inches. This is a basking shark, also a planktivore like the whale shark, and these guys you'll find off the coast here. And some of you may have even had a chance to see them. And then, of course, you have the planktivores, then you have the mammalophores as well, like the white shark. I like to hope that this will go away.
This lecture tonight helps us launch our new exhibit on the science of sharks, which if you haven't seen, I hope you go and see in the coming days and weeks. And that exhibit was something that we built kind of on top of all the interest we've had in our shark and ray touch tank, and people are always fascinated by sharks. And we wanted to find a way to help people dig a little deeper, learn more about them, and also to understand a little bit more about all the research that's done here and all the incredible animal care that's done here on sharks.
Thank you very much, Billy. Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming to listen to a talk about sharks. I was told that it didn't matter what I spoke about because I had an Australian accent that I could talk about anything. So I think I won't talk about sharks. I think I'll talk about the mechanical seal on Tupperware from the year 1954. Would that be okay? No. We're here to talk about sharks. I love sharks. John loves sharks. Many of you here love sharks. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we love sharks. So, without further ado, this is where I'm from originally in central western Australia. This is actually a photograph of the area that I actually lived and grew up. 500 miles from the nearest coastline, nowhere near sharks. And you might wonder how I ended up working with sharks. It's kind of a strange thing to do. Well, every year my family and I would go to the beach and we would I used to just love that. 3 weeks a year we'd go to the beach. And really I fell in love with the ocean, very corny. At 12 years old I already knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. And my parents would say, "So son, what do you want to do when you grow up?" "I want to be a marine biologist." Okay. But to their credit, they supported me, and I persisted in wanting to do this thing. Their friends were saying, "Well, your son's crazy. There are more people driving taxis in Sydney that have a marine biology degree than doing anything else." And but anyway, it's been a great career for me. So any of you young people out there thinking about doing this, I can tell you it would be very interesting. My first job after I graduated from university, and you have to graduate first, was to work at SeaWorld on the Gold Coast in Australia. It's a marine park like the SeaWorlds in the USA, and at that time in the mid-80s was very much a place of entertainment. But there were some great opportunities there to build on what they had. I was the first graduate to be employed there, and they were a little bit suspicious of this smart aleck university student. But it was just a fabulous place to work with all these animals. Before I had left, I was there for 7 years, I actually had started the education program and the research foundation at SeaWorld. So it was a great opportunity to be able to do that, and they've endured to this day. And that's kind of the thing I've done whenever I've gone elsewhere in the world. So, 7 years after I'd been at SeaWorld, I was invited to go to Barcelona, and that was about 9 days before I got married to my lovely wife, who's sitting up in the audience there, Ellen. I remember calling her up and saying, how we were thinking about moving to Perth, which we were. How does Barcelona sound? And she was very excited. So we went to Barcelona, and I was fortunate in leading the team that started up La Chrome Barcelona in Spain. 2 million visitors in the first year, 22% of whom were students through the education program. And then I was asked to go and start up the Oceanário de Lisboa in Portugal for the World Expo. This was then to be the largest aquarium in Europe, a fabulous exhibit. The architect of this aquarium was the architect of the New England Aquarium. The New England Aquarium was opened in 1968. That was his very first project. And this was a project that opened in 1998. And I led the team that started up that aquarium. However, my love of sharks started much earlier than that. When we were going to the beach and I was really still a boy, I was freediving and I learned to scuba dive when I was 16. And I went diving at a place called Seal Rocks, and this is what you will find at Seal Rocks, or what you would find, which is a breeding aggregation of grey nurse sharks, better known as the sand tiger shark, and you'll actually learn a bit about them from John later on in the talk. But this was just a fabulous sight. Sand tiger sharks are really pretty harmless. I mean, they can bite, but they are a very docile animal. And that was it, I was hooked. Here we have a bit of a close-up of a grey nurse, or a sand tiger, also known as the ragged-toothed shark in South Africa. And we'll talk a little bit more about these guys later on in the talk as well. So, sharks have a huge cultural significance, and that we find them in all different places of human life and culture. And I would actually like to ask, does anyone know the painter of this quite well-known American masterpiece? Not you. Anyone want to put their hand up and have a go? It's called the Gulfstream.
Winslow Homer.
Well done, Winslow Homer. You get a tiger shark for that.
Oh, wow.
So you're more invested in the questions now, aren't you? Yeah. Now there's something in the game here. All right. So this is another quite well-known artist. This is a Ray Troll, and he's a friend of the aquarium. If you don't know Ray Troll's work, I really encourage you to go and check it out. It's fantastic. It's both scientifically interesting and amusing, and actually beautiful as well. So check it out. So we have sharks in our apparel and even sharks in our cars. Really cool stuff. Sharks everywhere. Here's an interesting shark. This was installed into a tenement house in Cambridge in the UK as an anti-nuclear protest in 1983. And his neighbours petitioned the government to have this shark removed, and they lost. And it became such an important tourist attraction, it's actually still there to this day.
Wow.
So if you want to see a white shark sticking out of a house in the middle of England, that's where you go. Does anyone know the name of this work of art?
The name of it?
Ooh, Michael. Well, that's a really good answer. But it's not quite right. This is called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. It was made by Damien Hirst. Here's Damien, the character. He's one of the new artists movement in the UK, and this was in the Tate Gallery. It's actually a tiger shark in fallen. It cost many millions of pounds. I think it was commissioned by Saatchi originally. And it's been around for quite a while now, and actually it degraded so much they had to replace the shark at some point during its exhibition. Lego was so impressed by this, they actually did a little homage Lego piece of the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. Does anyone recognise this little photograph? Have you seen this? So you okay? This made the rounds of the internet a few years ago. And yes, you can see it's a white shark attacking a Navy SEAL. But that's the beauty of Photoshop. This is actually a photograph, as you can see. It's the US Air Force doing drills in San Francisco Bay. Here's the original photograph of the white shark by Charles Maxwell, who's a very well-known shark photographer in South Africa. And with a little bit of photoshopping. Oh my goodness, look at that. So don't believe everything you see. Now, of course, one place that sharks really have permeated our culture are movies. And I love a good shark movie. And actually, Jaws was one of the first I saw, of course. And as John will tell you, the same thing was actually a bit of a clarion call for me. I just loved Jaws. I loved the character of Hooper. And I think you'll find a lot of shark biologists had Jaws as quite a significant moment in their lives. And Peter Benchley, who wrote the book, was actually filled with remorse that he had caused a lot of fear and actually presented a risk to sharks by writing Jaws in the first place. But I would argue that he's actually inspired a lot of young shark biologists, and a lot of good has come from that. And I'm sure John will speak to that a little bit too. Here's another one, Shark Boy and Lava Girl by Roberto Rodriguez, who did the Spy Kids movies. And of course, they get interesting. Here we have Finding Nemo. Now, The name of the shark in Finding Nemo was Bruce. Can anyone tell me why it was called Bruce? Oh, yeah, yes.
The name of the fake shark in Jaws.
That's correct. It's the name of the fake shark in Jaws. That deserves a tiger shark. Could you pass that? There you go. So, that's right. And of course, they get more interesting. Deep Blue Sea. Did anyone see this movie? There was a cameo by Samuel L. Jackson. He was right in the middle of one of his really famous soliloquies, and the mutant Mako just took him out like that. He was gone for the rest of the movie. Kind of amusing. Sharknado, of course, you would have. I've not actually seen this. I haven't seen this movie, but apparently it's really bad. But I do love this one. This is hilarious. Atomic shark. The deadliest predator just went nuclear. And even funnier, this is going to be the best tagline of all. The coast is toast. I mean, you're just going to that's going to be just for that, I think. So why is there so much fascination about sharks? Well, of course, I think there's a visceral fear we have about sharks because anything that can eat you, obviously you're going to be, it gets the adrenaline going straight away. And then there's this other weird thing, particularly if you're a diver, you know this, when you're floating at the surface, you're sort of in two worlds. You're in the world above the water and the world below the water, and you can't really be aware of what's going on in both at the same time. So if you're a scuba diver out in the water, you kind of feel relaxed, but when you're at the surface and you're waiting to get to a boat, that's when you probably feel a little anxious because what's going on underneath me? Well, of course, the reality is not nearly as alarming as you think. There's actually a special group at the University of Florida that run what's called the International Shark Attack Index. And they look at any attack, unprovoked, anywhere around the world, look at all the conditions surrounding how that attack took place. And these are the statistics right here. You can see that there are very few attacks globally. And this is by decade. You can see it's gone up over time. But that's really most likely the result of lack of reporting than it is an increase in attacks. So obviously in the 1920s, communication wasn't what it is today. But the other really interesting thing to note here is that the pink bars there indicate the number of fatal attacks. And that really hasn't increased over that time, despite the increased use of the beaches and the more extreme water activities. So the chances of attack are incredibly, incredibly rare. It's so rare, in fact, that you are more likely to die from a scuba diving accident, from a strike by lightning, being stung by a bee, and there's even more chance of digging a hole in the beach and having it collapse on you than of being bitten and attacked by a shark. That's how rare it is. It's very, very rare. Of course, because it is just so visceral, we've come up with all these techniques to avoid being attacked by a shark. This is one example. This is a special wetsuit, and it's based on the coloration of a sea snake, or more correctly, a sea crate, which is a venomous snake, and it's supposed to scare the shark away. It's unclear whether this works or not. This is another one. This is called the shark pod, and this uses an electrical impulse to repel the shark because sharks have an electrical detection sense, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So this actually sends out a signal, an electromagnetic signal that repels the sharks. Here's another one. This is actually worn around the ankle. This is an acoustic repellent that emits the sound of an orca, which of course will repel the shark. And then this one, I like this. This is a shark repellent, and it's derived from purified shark. Who knew? The purified shark can repel sharks. Now this photo is a real photo. This is also by Charles Maxwell, and this is a series of photos he took in False Bay that was sort of very popular a few years ago, called air shark. Seals are the natural prey of white sharks, and white sharks are ambush predators, so it's coming out of the water in the process of actually catching the seal. And it's actually perfectly normal in nature. Nature is profligate. We actually produce all sorts of excess numbers of animals, and seals become stronger and through natural selection become better because occasionally some of them are taken by white sharks. So don't be too sad. Now there are all kinds of sharks. This one's called the wobbegong shark from Australia. Why is it called the wobbegong shark? Because wobbegong, the person who puts their hand near the shark. Okay, tough room. John and I have daughters, so there's going to be some really bad dad jokes here. Just be prepared for this. This is a black-tip shark, obviously. This is a 7-gill shark. Most sharks have 5 gills. This guy has 7. And this is a dinosaur shark, or a dinosaur ray, or a bony-up guitarfish. But they're very closely related to sharks. And this guy, if you look closely, you can see he actually has teeth along this dorsal ridge here. Really big bony protrusions that are actually teeth. Very cool shark. I'll work with those guys a little bit. Hammerhead sharks, of course, have this really weird thing called a cephalofoil. And this really cool little guy, also from Australia. This is a Port Jackson shark. Looks like he's wearing a camouflage net. Very nice little sort of fashion statement there. And mantas, and this little guy, this is a chimera, or an elephant fish, or a ratfish. They are all closely related to sharks because they are all chondrichthyan fishes, or all fishes that have cartilage as a skeleton. So wiggle your nose, everyone wiggle your nose, wiggle your ears. That's actually made of cartilage. Very soft and rubbery and flexible. And shark's skeleton is made of cartilage. That's what differentiates them from the bony fishes. Now some sharks are solitary, like this tiger shark, and also this oceanic white-tip shark, beautiful shark. They're called Carcharodontis longimanus. Longimanus referring to the very long pectoral fin, long hand. Some sharks like to group together, like these little nurse sharks all pig pile together, and you actually see that in the aquarium and some of the exhibits. And then you'll often see other species together as well, like this aggregation of hammerhead sharks. So some sharks are solitary, some get together. Some sharks are very big. This is the whale shark, the largest fish on the planet. Eats very small microscopic organisms. They grow about 40 feet long. That's about 12.5 meters for the metric out there. And then this little guy called the cigar shark, he's about the size of a cigar. Wow. They're about half a foot long, 6 inches. This is a basking shark, also a planktivore like the whale shark, and these guys you'll find off the coast here. And some of you may have even had a chance to see them. And then, of course, you have planktivores, then you have the mammalophores as well, like the white shark. I like to hope that this little guy got away, actually. But I don't know. Hard to say. So as I said, sharks have this skeleton of cartilage. It's very flexible. It's lighter than bone, and you'll see that's actually important for the energy budget of sharks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And sharks have a phenomenally large liver, a bilobal liver, and it takes up about a quarter of the entire of the body cavity, sometimes even more than that, up to a half. And the reason for that is that the liver is filled with an oil that is also lighter than water, and this helps them with their buoyancy as well. Because the liver is so large, through evolution, their small intestine has been compressed down into this weird organ called the spiral valve, which has a very, very big surface area, and the food spirals down through this organ and absorbs nutrients as it goes. But this organ takes up actually a very small space in the body cavity of the shark. And of course, one of the other things that differentiates sharks from bony fish is that they have gill slits, whereas bony fish have a gill cover that covers the gills. Now, sharks have some really cool sensors. One is called the lateral line, and if you look closely at this mako, you can see there's a little line running along here, and it is like a very sophisticated ear that's very good at detecting low-frequency vibrations, way below the frequency that we could actually hear with our ear, such as, for example, the beating of the tail of a struggling or injured fish, and the shark can detect that with its lateral line. They also have a really good sense of smell. This is called the Schneider folds. It's basically like the nostrils in a way, but it's chemically sampling the water. We chemically sample the air, droplets of chemicals in the air. Sharks chemically sample the water, and water just flows in, goes around the Schneider folds and out. So rather than only smelling when they're aspirating or they're breathing in, sharks actually detect chemicals the whole time because there's this flow of chemicals across the Schneider folds. Despite what you may have heard, sharks also have very good eyesight. So, I mean, I've heard the sort of, used to be the urban myth, if a shark in the water, stay still, because they won't see you. Okay, now what? But in fact, they have very good eyesight. And some sharks have what you can see here, which is this third eyelid here, called the nictitating membrane. And the reason they have that is because they can't stand the sight of blood. So, second bad joke. They also have the same membrane in their eye as a cat, called the tapetum lucidum. And what that does is, as the light passes through the cornea of the eye and falls on the retina, the light reflects back off the retina and hits the tapetum lucidum and then reflects back onto the retina. So they have very good eyesight in low light conditions. And then the other really cool sensor they have, and this is what the electro-repulsion system uses or tries to use against the shark, is what's called the ampullae lorenzini, and it's an electro-reception organ. And if you look closely, you can see little tiny holes around the head of the shark here. These are entrances to what are called pit organs that are part of the ampullae lorenzini, or are the ampullae lorenzini, and they can detect electrical impulses at incredibly minute levels. There are some sharks, for example, bonnethead sharks, they can detect their prey that is hidden in the sand based on the electrical impulse of its heart beating, of the prey's heart beating buried in the sand. So it's exquisitely sensitive. And that is why this electro-repulsion system can be very effective at short range to repel sharks. You can tell a lot from a shark looking at its anatomy. For example, looking at the tail of this shark, you can see what's referred to as the upper lobe is quite long, and the lower lobe is actually very short. This is very typical of a bottom-dwelling shark, a shark that typically lives on the bottom. Here's another example. This is the beautiful leopard shark. And it's actually swimming in the water, as you can see, but they spend a lot of time lying on the bottom as well. Compared to, say, a white shark, and you can see this tail is almost like a crescent moon, and therefore it's called lunate. And this is an example of a tail from a shark that has a predominantly pelagic or constantly swimming lifestyle. And then, of course, like everything in the world, there are exceptions. Here we have another pelagic shark. This is a fresher shark, but in this case, it has a very long upper lobe to its tail, and it is hypothesized that they use this to help catch prey. Sharks have really cool ways of reproducing. In fact, there are 3 different modes that they employ. One is that they can lay eggs in an egg capsule, and the little pup, as it's called, develops in the egg and hatches. Here's a little pup hatching out of an egg. There's no parental care at all. The eggs are left there and the parents go off elsewhere, and the pup hatches and has to fend for itself. And another mode of reproduction is that some sharks are actually born in an egg, but they are retained by the female in the uterus, where they hatch inside the female, and they actually give birth to live young, sometimes with a yolk sac attached. And this is referred to as ovoviviparity. And in the shark world. And then, of course, the third mode is very like mammals, very similar to mammals, but that is that there is actually a placenta and an umbilical cord, and the pups are born live. And sharks cover that whole spectrum of different reproductive strategies. So, of course, when you think about sharks, you think about their teeth. Here we have a toothy white shark, and this is the jaw of a white shark. And look at those teeth. They are impressive. In fact, if you run your finger down the edge of a white shark tooth, some of you may have done that, it actually will cut you. It's like a bread knife. They are incredibly sharp, even with that very mild pressure. And it's just a mild evolution that these teeth have evolved in this way. And you'll see there are several rows there. Sharks continuously replace their teeth throughout their lifetime. Like a conveyor belt, they roll forward from the back, they fall out at the front, and they just keep replacing them all the time. So you don't need to brush if you're a shark. It's all good. Now this is the tail of a ray, a stingray, and this is the barb of a stingray. And again, these are close relatives of sharks, but this is just a different defensive mechanism in this case. And just for those of you who are interested, stingray barbs, as you can see, they're quite nasty. There's often a protein associated with the barb that increases or intensifies the pain that results from being stung by a stingray. And well, why is that? Well, of course, it's going to make the aggressor go away more quickly if they're in pain. So it's a good defensive mechanism. These are the scales of the shark. They're called denticles. We'll come back to denticles in a second. And you can see here a microscopic view of denticles. And they look really rough, don't they? Really impressively rough under a microscope. What's really interesting, though, is that their form is different on different parts of the shark's body. And what that allows, or what that does, is that as the shark moves through the water, they are so fine-tuned over millions of years of evolution that the flow of water across the scales is laminar flow. There's no turbulent flow. So these scales reduce drag and therefore energy cost to the shark as it moves through the water. And it's amazing. You look at denticles from near the tail, they're completely different to denticles on, let's say, the other side of the pectoral fin. If you do a cross-section through a denticle, it looks just like a tooth. It's got enamel and pulp and dentine, just like a tooth. So they really are covered in millions of these tiny microscopic teeth. That's the handle of a 17th century samurai sword. So shark skin is so abrasive, but of course it gives great grip as well. And as a samurai, it's just not cool to draw your sword and throw it away. So they recognised that putting shark skin on the sword handle would obviously give the sword a lot of good grip. Quick talk on Shark Physiology 101. I'm going to zip through this because it's all a bit dry, but you'll get the point. So sharks have a small gill surface area and O2 carrying capacity is very low. In other words, it's hard for them to get oxygen out of the water. So many sharks have to swim forward to extract oxygen from the water. That's why you would have heard that sharks have to keep swimming or they may die. Not all sharks, but white sharks and other open water sharks need to keep swimming. Also, moving the muscles of the shark help pump the blood through the body system and help remove carbon dioxide from the shark's body. Sharks, unlike bony fish, will sink unless they're moving forward. Because the rigid pectoral fins, like the wings of an aeroplane, give it lift as it goes through the water. So the tail generates thrust, like the jet engine, and the pectoral fins give the shark lift. So sharks, again, over millions of years, have evolved this mode of swimming where they actively swim up in the water column and then they glide down. So half of their time, they're actually not actively swimming. They're just sort of gliding through the water column. So what does that mean? It means if a shark has to turn prematurely, if it comes to a barrier, it consumes more energy than it would if it could just go through the cycle of actively swimming and passively gliding. And if this happens repeatedly, particularly for an open water shark, a pelagic shark, ultimately will be the result of exhaustion and death of that shark. So a shark that can keep swimming straight ahead, that's a happy shark. A shark that has to turn is not so happy. And in fact, there's a whole formula around what is the energy budget of the shark based on how it's swimming. And there's a sweet spot where it's not swimming too quickly or too slowly, where the expenditure of energy is at a minimum. The total cost of transport is at a minimum. And this is the optimal swimming speed for the shark. If it's swimming too slowly, it's stalling and it's using energy to stay up in the water column. If it's swimming too quickly, it's exerting itself. So what happens when the shark is hyperactive? In other words, when it's really, really exercising? This is like an athlete who overexerts himself. So one obvious thing that happens is that it consumes all the glucose in its blood and then it mobilizes glycogen from the liver to try and give it more energy. And then ultimately that becomes exhausted as well. And that's food for its muscles. The other thing that happens is it can't get rid of the carbon dioxide fast enough. And this drives this reaction, called the carbonic acid reaction, in this direction. And so the CO2 means that you yield hydrogen ions or protons, and this makes the blood acidic. In other words, the more CO2 in the blood, the more acidic the blood becomes. The other thing that happens is that just like an athlete, just like us, when you exercise in the absence of oxygen anaerobically, you produce lactic acid. That's what makes the muscles feel so tight and sore. And that breaks down and produces another hydrogen ion or proton. So you have this double whammy effect of all of this acid, and very quickly the shark's body starts to suffer from this, what's called acidosis. And one of the primary effects is that it breaks down the integrity of the cell wall, and potassium leaks out into the serum, and the shark suffers from what's called hyperkalemia. This is excess acid, this is excess potassium in the system, and that actually can lead to cardiac dysfunction, so the heart stops pumping. So now you've got a triple whammy. You've got acid from too much carbon dioxide, acid from lactic acid, and then the heart stops working, so it can't pump the blood around to get rid of more of this carbon dioxide. And this runaway effect results in the shark ultimately perishing. So how do you avoid this from happening? Well, in an aquarium, what you do is you build the aquarium so that it has a long horizontal distance. Here's an example from Monterey Bay Aquarium, where the shark can swim, glide, turn, swim, glide, and that way the shark's not really expending too much energy, so it has a very healthy energy budget. You can also catch sharks quickly, rather than on a hook or a line. In this case, this is a sand tiger shark being caught with a hoop, and very quickly using that rope, pulled to the surface, put into a stretcher to restrain it, and then put into, let's say, a box for transporting. And by catching and moving the shark so quickly, it doesn't have time to be excessively hyperactive and start to compromise its physiology. The other thing is, who knew, but you can give sharks Gatorade. It's a special Gatorade, true, but it's Gatorade. Basically, you can give the shark sugar in the form of dextrose or some similar sugar, and you can counteract the effects of the acid by giving the shark bicarbonate or carbonate, which is a basic compound, and that balances it out. So this is a formula that we developed many, many years ago. You can see here a shark in a box about to be shipped overseas. And if you look in the back, you can see an oxygen cylinder, and you can also see an IV drip here with the shark dextrose and the carbonate slowly dripping into the shark's bloodstream to counteract the effects of the capture and also of being still in this box. So you do that, you can actually put a shark on a plane. Who knew that sharks could fly? And off they go. And this is just some examples of some of the transports that have been done with sharks over the years to different parts around the world. You can go quite a long way with sharks if they're well prepared. And sometimes the conditions when you arrive aren't exactly as you expect. Here's an example. We shipped some sharks to France, and we had the dimensions of the box, and we said to the people receiving the shark, okay, this is a big box, you've got to make sure we have clear access to the aquarium so we can get the box up close to the tank to put the shark in. Oh yeah, no problems, we've got it sorted out. That's all good. Okay, very good. We arrived, obviously there's a shark in the box here, and their solution was to post the shark through this window that they popped out into the aquarium. Actually worked very well in the end, but it was a little hair-raising there for a few moments, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I'm actually giving a shark an injection here, an antibiotic, after a transport. And when I first got into working with sharks many years ago, of course, as a young learning biologist, I thought, well, I want to know more about how to care for sharks. This is so cool. And I thought, I need to find a book about how to care for sharks. And it turns out there wasn't one. And I started to realise, well, there's a frontier here where someone hasn't actually done this work. So after a few years, having worked with a number of people, I realised that we should actually do this. And I partnered with a colleague at the Columbus Zoo in Ohio, and then we recruited about 40, 50 biologists, and we wrote, like the whole collective, wrote the first book on how to care for sharks, the Elasmobranch Husbandry Manual. And it was published in 2004, that's the blue one. And I will thank my wife and daughter for tolerating my behaviour over the last 12 months, because we just released a second volume with another 45 chapters, and that's coming out this May, actually, and that's this one here. So if you're a shark biologist and you're interested, they're free. Just download them from the internet. Of course, we think about jaws, we think about sharks being the consumers of humans, but of course, as many of you know, the reality is that it is the reverse, that we consume sharks. And there's a group called the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They assess the conservation status of all sorts of animals, and as of about a week ago, this is the conservation status of elasmobranchs that have been assessed. As you can see, at least 20 are critically endangered. And here are some examples of species that are either endangered or critically endangered. Beautiful animals. I want to point out particularly these guys here. These are sawfish, but they are very closely related to sharks. There are, it varies depending on what taxonomist you speak to, but there's about 7 different species. Every single one of them is considered, at the very least, endangered, and generally they're all critically endangered. So why? We know the cause of this is hippopotamus, right? I want you to think about hippos. Hippos, why? Because hippo is an acronym that refers to anthropogenic threats to biodiversity. HIPPO. And they are habitat destruction, invasive species, population growth, pollution, and overharvesting. And all of these things represent a threat to sharks, but the most important is overharvesting, and John will talk a bit more about this. We fish way too many sharks. In fact, in a year, we harvest enough sharks that if you lay them side by side, they would go across from New York to LA 5 times in a year. It's an impressive number of sharks. This beautiful shark, the sand tiger shark I've been talking about, on the east coast of Australia, is critically endangered. Why? Well, it's been overfished by commercial and recreational fishers. In the 70s and 80s, it was very popular to use a thing called a bang stick, which is a shotgun on the end of a spear, to kill sand tiger sharks. And here's Bondi Beach on Christmas Day, very famous beach in Australia. It's a great Australian pastime to go swimming. And off the coast, we have shark nets. Now, shark nets do not enclose the beach like a barrier. They actually catch and kill sharks. They're designed to fish and kill sharks. If you look at the shark nets along the edge of a beachfront, only about 1/4 of the beachfront has a net in front of it. But the sharks go back and forth, inshore and offshore, and as they do that, they get caught in the nets and they die. So they're actually a fishing net. That's how shark nets work. The unfortunate thing is that other marine fauna get caught in these nets, and here we have a humpback whale. Because of this, I'm giving you a short version, I was actually able to start the Rescue and Research Foundation at SeaWorld. There was so much concern about animals being trapped in the nets that we were able to get sponsors to support this effort. And here's an example. That's actually me and a colleague in the water, and this is a humpback whale's fluke you can see here. We successfully released this whale from the shark net and was able to go and rejoin its pod, which is very nice. We also implemented a whole lot of other reforms to the meshing practice to reduce bycatch. There are things like reflective discs and acoustic alarms that didn't repel the target sharks, but did repel dolphins, whales, and other species. And then here's a shark that swallowed a fishing gaff, so a massive big hook on an aluminium pole, or maybe an aluminum pole. And the SeaWorld crew here catching the shark, and there's our vet, David Glidey, put his arm right down inside the shark there in a PVC pipe to force the gaff backwards so he could then extract it from the shark and then release the shark back. But let's skip ahead to John now. John, as Billy mentioned, is our VP of Research and is leading the Anderson Capital Centre for Ocean Life. And he's going to tell you some of the work that they do with sharks at the Anderson Capital Centre.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being here. We've already heard a lot about shark biology. I learned a lot tonight. Thank you, Mark. This was great. So tonight, for me, I just want to, well, first I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I got into sharks, which is an interesting story, kind of like Mark. So I was born in New York City, 1973, and born and raised Upper West Side. Not a lot of sharks around there that I know of. Well, at least the sharks that we're talking about tonight. But I was born and raised in Manhattan, and at about 2 years old, my family bought a house on the south shore of Long Island, a place called Oak Beach, which is between Robert Moses and Fire Island, if you know it. Well, actually, it's right across from Fire Island. It's also close to it's between Jones Beach and Robert Moses State Park. So I was exposed to the water at a very young age, age 2, and we actually own this house to this day. And this was really where my love for the ocean started to bloom originally. Right around the same time, my parents read the book, the novel Jaws, in the summer of 1974. The movie came out the subsequent year. They saw the movie. Like many, many other people, they never went in the water again, at least in the immediate future. It started the summer blockbuster tradition of movies, and it was obviously very iconic. Mark talked about it earlier. So Jaws scared a lot of people. They also made the mistake of showing me the movie way too young. So I saw the movie at, I think I was about 5 years old. Unlike other people, though, that get scared from watching Jaws, this is a shot of my daughters a couple weeks ago when I showed them the movie. Their expressions speak for themselves, but I would say something between being aghast and horrified. Jaws doesn't resonate with everybody. It scares the heck out of a lot of people. It did not scare me, though. I wanted to be a shark scientist from a very early age. So they watched Jaws, they got scared. I wanted to go in the water. So I did a lot of time on the water when I was a kid. That's me with a beluga whale out in the Atlantic Ocean. I was pretty scared, but I got in. Me fishing with a triggerfish. And then over the years, my love just blossomed for marine science and ended up somehow making a career out of it. And have had a million incredible adventures along the way. Experiencing all kinds of people, all kinds of incredible projects, and of course, all kinds of exciting sharks. So I consider myself very lucky and fortunate to have had a chance to study these animals that we've learned so much about tonight. And even stood here in this theater a couple years ago and shared the stage with Wendy Benchley, who was married to the late Peter Benchley, close friend of the aquarium that Mark mentioned earlier, who had a constant guilt complex about what he did to sharks. And I agree wholeheartedly with Mark that Jaws did not do a disservice to sharks, but ended up leading to what's become a very strong conservation movement for sharks, promoting awareness. And he was an advocate for them the rest of his life after he wrote Jaws until he passed away. And I had the pleasure of meeting him here at the aquarium, who's a close friend of ours here. So tremendous legacy. So now to shift back into biology and pick up just a little bit where Mark left off. He talked about some of the vulnerabilities of sharks. He gave a great primer on the physiology of sharks. Why are sharks vulnerable? Why do we have some of these conservation threats to sharks? Why are some of those species that Mark mentioned threatened or endangered? Well, sharks have what we call a K-selected life history strategy, which is a fancy way of saying they have a very slow growth rate. They grow to attain very large body sizes. They live very long lives. Some sharks can live in 50, 60 years. And of course, we found out recently through this amazing study that the Greenland shark that was published this year can live to what, a couple hundred years old? So we could potentially have sharks out there that were alive before the Civil War, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. So long life expectancy, they reach sexual maturity very late in life. And they put a lot of, as Mark alluded to, a high parental investment. Now, this doesn't mean that there's parental care, as Mark mentioned, but they expend a lot of energy for these very few animals, very few young, to develop to be able to fend for themselves when they're born. So there's very few precocious offspring. These sharks are meant to be able to go right at it, be able to actively hunt and avoid predators themselves. Sharks do like to eat other sharks right when they're born. All of these things collectively, though, add up to a very high level of vulnerability. Sharks do not reproduce at a high rate, and all these factors make them particularly susceptible to human activities like overharvesting, as Mark mentioned. Their numbers can plummet very rapidly, and then there needs to be a huge protective mechanism to the population for them to recover. So the overharvesting of sharks has been a major problem for many years, driven by a number of different demands. Everything from the cartilage that Mark mentioned that composes their skeleton, to the livers that he also mentioned that have a very high squalene content, which is used for cosmetic products. That's the fat that helps them stay positively buoyant in the seawater. And then, of course, the fins, which I'll talk about again in a minute. But sharks, this is some data showing the annual landings or catch that is kept that's harvested and kept in a fishery. Between sharks, rays, and chimeras that Mark also talked about, over the last 60 years leading up to 2010, and you can see almost a fourfold increase, if you're talking by weight, of the amount of sharks that have been taken in fisheries around the world. So that's a huge, huge amount of sharks. And there's all these estimates that are thrown around about how many are harvested every year. A recent study that came out in 2013 talked about a range of 63 to 273 million per year. Mark showed the slide of laying the sharks side by side across the country. It's not an exaggeration. A lot of sharks are culled or pulled every year. There are some sustainable fisheries for sharks. Here in the United States, we actually have a pretty good set of management schemes in place for sharks. But there are a lot of areas around the world that have policies and they cannot enforce them. They don't have the governance or the economic ability to do that. And there are many other areas of the world that have no legal jurisdiction. So there's really no law in place, or there's certainly no enforcement to be able to stop huge amounts of sharks being pulled from the ocean. This is just one grid from a study that came out in 2007 that I think just shows the magnitude of shark declines over the years, where you see that these are the rates of decline for different populations off the eastern U.S. coast based on fishery logbook data and observer program data of some common species that you've probably heard of: sandbar, blacktip tiger, hammerhead bull, and the rate or the magnitude of decline. Now, although there's some debate about the actual magnitude of these declines among scientists, nobody argues the notion that shark populations have gone down dramatically in recent years. So I mentioned some of the driving threats or some of the driving demands that drive the market. The main one is, of course, the fins. In many cultures, it's a delicacy, the shark fin soup. And the fins themselves are part of a trade. People have associated something called finning, where the sharks are captured, the fins are cut off. As you see in the bottom right image, the sharks are then left to die. As Mark alluded to, many sharks need to swim around to breathe. So if they're unable to swim with their fins, they can't forage, they can't hunt for food, they can't swim around and ventilate, so they're ultimately going to die. So there's an animal welfare issue going on here, as well as a conservation issue. But even when sharks are not being finned, and they're being completely harvested around the world, the fins are driving a disproportionate amount of the value and the demand for these sharks. And in a lot of areas around the world now, where this is a delicacy, particularly in Asia, there are efforts to try to reduce the demand for these fins and the shark fin soup and think about substitutes. It's a cultural staple, so we have to be very respectful of that. There are a lot of people that don't know, per se, that this is leading to such incredible conservation threats around the world. But we do know that this is a major driver of why sharks are being removed and overharvested. And overfishing in general is a major problem for sharks. This is just a visual by Daniel Fernando, who, if you were here for his manta ray lecture a few weeks back, this is an image he took, I believe in Ecuador, from above, of a shark fin market. So it's an illegal trade there. And there's actually a mafia, a shark fin mafia that operates, that does these things illegally behind the scenes. And for those of you that saw the late Rob Stewart's film Shark Water, he actually infiltrated one of these mafia schemes and got incredible footage of the operation in action as part of his incredibly powerful film that came out several years ago. So this is a great image, I think a very telling image by our friend and colleague and here at the aquarium, Brian Sterry, of animals being thrown back into the ocean after they've been caught in fishing practices. Bycatch is a major issue for many species around the world, and it's certainly an issue for sharks. This is the amount, and you can see the top data on the top of the slide. This is the magnitude, the volume of individuals that are thrown back in fisheries in the Atlantic every year. Roughly 76,000 tons and 2.3 million individuals are thrown back by accident. Bycatch is when the catch is harvested but not landed, not kept for market, not kept for personal use or for business, but thrown back into the water. And as Mark alluded to with some of the beach nets, there are a lot of different types of fishing gear out there. The fishing gear is extremely good at catching what it intends to catch, but it's extremely indiscriminate, meaning it also catches a lot of other stuff while it's doing so. So with that, you get this huge amount of what's called bycatch. And this is really where my work at the aquarium started in 2001. I was very interested in understanding, okay, all this shark is caught by accident, and then it's thrown back. Some of these sharks survive, some of them don't. Even within a species, some of them are more inclined to survive than others. What is driving that differential survival? And what can we do as conservation-minded individuals, both in the policy realm and also in working with the fishing industry, to increase the probability that these sharks are going to survive when they're thrown back? So that was really my driving impetus. At the same time, I was trained as a biochemist. And in his excellent primer, Mark talked about the physiology of sharks. And I realized, based on his point about the exertion, when sharks are overexerted, they can actually be stressed to the point where their acidosis builds up in their blood and they can die. And I realized that the physiological stress involved with being caught in fishing operations could be lethal. If not right away, then hours or days after the shark is thrown back into the ocean. There was a very famous study that was published on rainbow trout in the 1980s that showed that when these animals are exerted, when they are exhaustively exercised, they seem to be okay right after. And then 7-8 hours later, suddenly they would drop dead. And people would ask why. And they realized that the acidosis was catching up with the shark, and they would undergo these lethal consequences. So that's a major issue when you're talking about stress, whether it's imposed by fishing capture or other human activities like climate change or pollution. So Mark talked about some of the conservation statuses of sharks. Bycatch is listed as a major threat to roughly 2/3 of the 109 shark species. This doesn't include rays and skates, the close cousins of the sharks, that have that kind of IUCN conservation concern designation. So in a paper that came out in 2012, bycatch was characterized as a major issue facing many of these imperiled shark species. So the mortality occurs from different ways. You can have sharks caught up in these nets. The ventilation, their ability to breathe is impeded, and then they end up dying from that factor. Sometimes they're exhaustively exercised as they're trying to outrun a net. Sometimes there's physical trauma. They're injured from compaction in fishing gear or from being caught in the twine of a net, and they cannot recover. So there are many different avenues, but collectively, these can be extremely stressful in an acute manner and lead to mortality of these animals. So if you've seen one shark, you've seen them all, right? They're all the same in terms of their resilience to fishing capture. And this is really what drives my interest in the research field, is that you can have, in this case, two what are called congeneric species. They have the same genus, but they're different species. On the left, you have the black tip shark, and on the right, you have the sandbar shark. These two sharks have very similar life histories. They live in this relatively similar habitats. They are known to be somewhat similar, yet their mortality rates are drastically different. And in a couple different studies, you probably can't see these too well, but in a couple different studies that we published and close colleagues published, we found that the mortality rates among sharks like these two can range in longline fisheries, which is the predominant way sharks are caught around the world, from 10% all the way up to 90%. So there's a huge range in their ability to survive. Something like a hammerhead shark is going to be dead within a couple minutes in a net. But you can have something like a tiger shark or a bull shark that can survive in a net for hours and hours and hours and be completely fine. So what's driving this difference has a huge set of conservation implications, in that we need to be extremely careful about the way we handle and the rate of capture of the sharks that are most vulnerable or most sensitive to being caught and released. So ultimately, work like ours and these other studies was used in the management side to better manage the very imperiled dusky shark, Carcharodontis obscurus. Now, this is the goal of all the work we do here at the Anderson Cabot Center at the aquarium, and a lot of the work that I've done, is to try to generate information and data that helps drive conservation action. So it helps inform management policy, it helps inform the way that these animals should be treated, and that really characterizes a lot of what we've done. And that leads into the solutions. And this is not, this little metaphor is purposeful. Avoiding the sharks is sometimes the best way to conserve them. So fortunately, over the years, studies that are looking at ways to reduce bycatch mortality and mortality of sharks due to human interactions has increased. These studies have gone up as the attention to this topic and the dire urgency of addressing it has gone up. So that's a good thing. And the aquarium's been really at the forefront of a lot of that work, both in trying to reduce the rate of bycatch in the first place, and then accepting the fact that if bycatch is going to happen, how can we reduce the mortality of the animals that are caught? So this really characterizes the shark research work that we do here at the center, the aquarium. We're looking at stress levels and health in these animals. We're looking at the most harmful aspects of capture, and we're looking at ways to reduce the rate of capture in the first place. And those, as you can see on the right, are the recipients of these data. So these are the groups that use the data or that are approached about learning more about the data so that they could hopefully embrace it and use it. Fortunately, we've had a great track record of working closely with different industry sources and fisheries managers to ensure that the way that we're getting this work implemented in the fisheries is cooperative. Trying to shove this down the throats of industry sources as you have to save the sharks is not necessarily going to work. So we try to take a tact of let's work together and figure out ways to better allow you to catch your target catch and at the same time avoid these animals that are so vulnerable. Some of the ways that we and other scientists have explored this, and Mark alluded to this earlier, is the use of electropositive metals and magnets to overstimulate the ampullae of Lorenzini that Mark showed you earlier. So those very, very sensitive electroreceptors on the snout, on the rostrum of these sharks that can detect such minute pulses of electromagnetic signal can also be overstimulated. So kind of like we use our auditory senses to function in the everyday world, we also don't like very loud noises, right? It can be disturbing. So with these very highly reactive metals, and if you remember your chemistry classes, if you look at the very bottom of the periodic table, there's a series of metals called the lanthanide earth metals. And those lanthanide metals in alloy form have been used, because they're highly reactive, to overstimulate and disturb the senses of these sharks. Now, how could that reduce bycatch, you might ask? Well, in this picture, you can see with a hook, if you put these electropositive metals near the fishing gear, then when these sharks come in to investigate a food source on a hook, they might be more inclined to leave the area or be repelled. So the same sort of repellents that Mark described for avoiding shark attacks can also be used to reduce potential shark fisheries interactions with different gear types. There's been a lot of work in this domain, and it's actually been quite promising. And there have been studies in the lab and the field that have shown remarkable reductions in interactions with hooked fishing gear, which again, longline fisheries, if you've seen the movie The Perfect Storm, longline fisheries that target tuna and swordfish are the predominant mode of capture for sharks around the globe. So they're the ones that we have to focus on the most in terms of bycatch. So that's my quick little conservation primer. Now I'm going to take the last few minutes before I shift back to Mark to cap this talk, to give a little plug for the rest of our lecture series this season. As I mentioned, the Anderson Cabot Center is doing a lot of incredible shark conservation and biological research here at the New England Aquarium. My close colleague, Jeff Kneebone, Dr. Jeff Kneebone, is going to be presenting next week. Mark mentioned the sand tiger shark, or the gray nurse shark as it's termed in Australia. Amazing species. And we're going to learn a lot about the resurgence of this species in local waters here in New England, which is very exciting, next week. So please come back for that. It's a really, he's an incredible speaker, and this is a really, really neat topic. The work he does, to give a little bit of a primer, is very similar to using an easy pass on the highway. He uses what are called acoustic transmitters, which are a type of technology used for a lot of regional studies. I actually have another colleague in the audience, Cynthia Wigren, who her team is involved in doing white shark research with Dr. Greg Skomel. They're using acoustic transmitters as well to track white sharks in the region. When they come in and out of a zone of coverage where you have an acoustic receiver, these transmitters ping to the receiver, and the receiver collects and archives the information, the data. Jeff, my colleague who's presenting next week, is going to talk about how this technology is used to track sand tiger sharks in New England waters. My other colleague, new here at the aquarium, Dr. Nick Whitney, who's a senior scientist in our Anderson Cabot Center, is going to be talking about some other high-tech tags that he uses to understand the natural behavior of sharks and also understand how they react to being caught and released in fishing gear. He's going to be talking about accelerometer tags, which are a really neat technology that everybody that has a cell phone in here has an accelerometer tag in their cell phone. Everybody that tracks their energy and movement using a Fitbit, there's an accelerometer in that. That's been calibrated to energy expenditure, and that's how you know that you can track your energy expenses and caloric breakdown every day. he uses these same technologies to track sharks in the wild. And I just wanted to end my bit talking about our brand new exhibit that was mentioned by Billy Spitzer at the beginning of the talk. Incredible, I think, collage of the animal care work we do here in the aquarium, the immersive experience of learning about the biology and conservation of these animals, and then representing the Anderson Cabot Center's research at the aquarium and how that's playing a role in the conservation of these animals. So this is really exciting for us at the aquarium and really brings together a lot of our strengths and different elements, and hopefully is a great learning experience for all of you. So with that being said, I'm going to shift back to my colleague here, and you're going to finish it up. We're going to talk about solutions beyond what I've already discussed.
I just wanted to give you some pointers about what you can do to take part in preserving sharks. There's actually quite a lot you can do. If you think about the hippo, all of those anthropogenic or human-induced reasons that sharks are threatened, then you can actually take part in some of the solutions. One, for example, is join your friends and protest the destruction of habitat. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. Buy local produce, shifting produce or buying things that were manufactured across the world or across the country takes a lot of fossil fuel, and actually can also involve habitat destruction as well. So buy local, eat local is a very good thing to do. Don't take Freddy and flush him down the toilet. Very bad. You're actually introducing a species into the wild that may not have come from that location. You can introduce disease, and it actually can become a real pest and outcompete. Could introduce disease to sharks, or could actually in some way modify their environment that poses a threat to the shark. Use renewable energy if you can. Again, fossil fuels are a real problem. It's very easy here, actually. You can call up your energy company and say, I'd like to convert to energy that comes from only renewable resources, and you pay a few cents extra, but they'll actually do that. Now, I know the electron that comes to your door may not have come from a renewable source, but actually they do buy energy from renewable sources, and the proportion that you buy is actually attributed to that budget that they have for that work. Why not use a real mower rather than a gas-driven mower? Actually, they're quite good nowadays. They are very easy to use. We actually have one. Carpool. Great way to save energy. And don't buy products made from sharks, of course, shark leather, and certainly don't buy shark fin soup. And just a little tiny sciencey geeky thing on shark fin soup. Here we have some shark fins from a market in Hong Kong. Hard to tell what species of shark those fins came from, isn't it? And if it's a prohibited species, a shark that's protected, then how do you tell? Well, actually, there are researchers working on this, have actually been working on this for some years, and there is a way you can tell. You can take a dried shark fin, extract a little bit of DNA from that shark fin, and using a technique called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, you can take that tiny little fragment of DNA and amplify it, and then, with enough of that, you can actually do what's called a chromatogram, a sophisticated chromatogram. It actually runs out on this sheet, and this is like a fingerprint. We know the primers, we actually have the primers for particular species, and it's like a fingerprint for the shark. So you can take a shark fin, and you can tell what shark species it came from. And they've got this down to a stage where, or to a level where you can have a little package unit that you can do in the field with a small unit, and so you can actually prohibit or you can actually prosecute people who have proscribed fins from a protected species. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for your attention. It's been a long talk, but it's been our pleasure to present this.
So we have time for some questions. I'll repeat them every time so everybody else in the audience can hear them. It can be directed to either of us, both of us. We can hand them off if anybody has any.
The name of the documentary you referenced earlier, Shark Waters?
The name of the documentary I referenced is called Shark Water by Rob Stewart, who was a real hero in the shark conservation world. Unfortunately, he passed away in a dive accident a couple months ago now in the Florida Keys. But you should be able to find that. It won a bunch of awards as an independent film.
Why do whale sharks have white spots on them?
Why do whale sharks have white spots on them? You want to take that one?
Hold on, you do that one.
Okay. So a lot of sharks have different coloration on their top and bottom, and some of them are meant to, do you know what the word is when you're trying to blend in with your environment?
Camouflage.
Camouflage, great. So whale sharks, do you know where they live in the water? Do they live high in the water, like near the surface, or do they live deeper?
Near the surface.
Right, excellent. So they live near the surface, and the coloration is meant to mimic what it looks like to have sunspots and that sort of iridescent reflection on the water. So it allows them to camouflage.
I can't help myself. Now look at that great white shark. It's got a really interesting feature, talking about camouflage, called counter shading. See that sort of line there? It's all dark on the top half and white on the bottom half. That's actually a camouflage. Counter shading is really useful for an ambush predator like a white shark. Because when you're looking down at it from above, against the dark of the water, the dark blends in. If you're looking at it from below, against the light sky, the light blends in. So counter shading is another form of camouflage and is really good if you're an ambush predator.
Other questions? Yeah.
I had a question regarding the metals that were used. So you have two conflicting things. The metals would push the shark away, but the bait would bring the shark to it. So can you explain a little bit about how that would work? Because it doesn't seem to me, it seems like the smell, the chemical smell, would be more attractive than getting close to the electrical
Absolutely.
metals.
So the question is the trade-off there between the smell and any sort of olfactory cue that's being elicited by the bait. How does that correspond with the repulsion from the electropositive metal? That's a great question. The answer is it's a little bit complex. Generally, in the studies that have been done in the laboratory, the disturbance is enough to overcome the attraction to the bait, unless, of course, the shark is extremely hungry, which makes sense. We are more inclined to eat gross food if we're really hungry, at least I am. So when they come in, they will deal with the aversion or with the disturbance from the electromagnetic or electropositive metal if they've been deprived of food for a certain amount of time experimentally. Now, of course, in the wild, we don't know when they've last eaten, but in general, the thought is that you're looking for an overall rate of reduction. So you're thinking that in some cases the shark may be more selective, in some cases not, but it's an important factor in determining that. Also, a lot of fisheries now have been trying to use baits that are not as attractive to sharks, but may still be attractive to the target catch as a way to reduce bycatch.
Hammerheads, the hammer or whatever is on their face, is it used for something, or is it just something that just to show off?
It's a great question. So the cephalofoil on the head, the hammerhead, is that used for anything? And you want to field that one? I'm happy to take it.
I suppose it's more than enough.
Okay. Well, Mark might be able to add to this answer, but in general, it comes down, at least from my perspective, what I've learned, it comes down to the ampullae of Lorenzini, those electrical receptors. So you have a somewhat binocular view. That's part of it. So it expands the visual spectrum for the animal. But the electroreceptors, the way that these hammerheads feed, and the bonnet heads we have now back in our giant ocean tank, same sort of principle. If you've ever seen a video on YouTube, they kind of go like this as they swim, and they go around, and their head almost serves as a metal detector. So it covers a lot of ground, and you have a really wide array, or a wide surface area to cover as much ground as possible till you pick up food. They eat a lot of things under the sand. They eat a lot of crustaceans and clams and things of that nature, and they crunch on those. So they pick those things up under the sediment, and they almost operate like a metal detector. And that's really how the head functions. Is that right?
An unprovable answer.
I asked one time, so I have proof.
I know in Florida, like along the Gulf Coast, for people who are doing deep sea fishing, they've had a problem with the swim bladders coming up of the fish. So if you throw it back, it's likely going to die it. So they use different weights to add depth release
Yep.
to improve the
Yep.
Have you considered that at all for the release of sharks?
That's a great question. I can take that one if you're okay with it. So sharks don't have gas bladders. So that's one simple way to answer it. Unlike bony fish, where the gas bladder expands when they're decompressed. So pressure at the surface, to give you a quick primer, is 1 atmosphere. Every 30 or so feet you go down in the water, you increase by 1 atmosphere. So when you have an animal that's accustomed to living at depth, like red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, and you rapidly bring them up to the surface and depressurize them, the gas has to go somewhere. So the gas bladder sometimes ruptures, gas in the body cavity ends up expanding other organs and pushing them out, whether it be the eyes or the distension of the stomach. Sharks don't deal with that, fortunately for them, but a lot of bony fish do. And actually, here at the aquarium, we're studying a couple of species looking into that, black sea bass and cusk.
Well, I meant more like, have you considered a way to release the sharks so that they're moving again, something so that their blood levels go back to normal?
That's another great question. Have we considered a way to release the sharks so that they're moving again or they're ventilating? A lot of times when we are trying to resuscitate a shark, when it's been caught, we will slowly move it next to the boat. We'll go at a very idle, slow speed in the boat and get some oxygen pumping, perfusing across its gills. And that sometimes will wake up the shark, allow enough gas transport that they can recover. Mark can probably speak to that more from the captive side as well. It's certainly something that we do here in the aquarium and that other aquaria do. And a lot of the work we've done in our research is trying to investigate not just resuscitating them in the water, but hastening their release, getting them back in the water quicker, or using certain handling tactics that ameliorates the stress on them. So that point, your larger point, is a great one. There are certain methods we can use to increase the probability of survival.
Yeah, well, I can just add a little bit to that, exactly what John said. You can actually introduce oxygen concentrations in excess of what they would normally have in atmospheric pressure, even up as much as 200% saturation. And you can also just gently palpate the shark's trunk and its tail, which is basically moving it back and forth as if it were swimming to promote the circulation of its blood and therefore to blow off the excess CO2. And just one little weird kind of twist to what John said too, which is that, of course, sharks don't have a gas bladder, but one species of shark, which is the sand tiger shark again, our fave,
Gulps air.
they actually gulp and swallow air and store the air in their stomach to give it buoyancy. So they're unique in the shark world that they can actually just hang in the water if there's a gentle current with this air in their stomach. So if they come up to the surface quickly, potentially you could rupture the shark's stomach. Of course, I've never seen that happen. Typically what happens is the shark burps, which is not very pleasant, but that's how they get rid of the excess air.
Imagine like a pelagic shark is used to a linear migration. You showed the design of the aquarium tanks. Do you find that with the figure 8 motion, is there a learning curve there, or do they just naturally optimize their motions?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And there's so many answers to that. But first of all, the first choice you have to make is that you don't acquire a large pelagic shark that typically would never encounter a barrier, because the likelihood is that that shark will not be able to survive long term in an exhibit. And so that's really important to choose the right species. But there are some pelagic sharks that do occasionally encounter a barrier, and actually white sharks is one of them, because they do come inshore more than a lot of the other open water shark species. Of course, they still have a very large home range. They would need a very, very large tank. And it's really only been successfully maintained in one aquarium in the world, and that's the Outer Bay exhibit at Monterey Bay Aquarium. And they invest incredible resources into catching a young of the year shark, small enough that they can transport, and then maintain that shark for just a little bit under a year before they then tag and release it again. Because in longer term, it just would not be able to adapt to time in an aquarium. So the choice is really important. Then if you do have a species that can do well long term, as long as the conditions are right, you use strategies to change the swimming pattern that the shark might adopt. And why do you do that? So the shark doesn't actually develop sort of an asymmetric musculature as a result of always swimming in a particular direction. So you use techniques to make sure that they have an irregular swimming pattern, but always have that long horizontal distance. And then there are like a dozen other things you can do too, but I won't bore you with all tonight. But yeah, there's a lot of techniques that you can use to optimize the chances of that shark really flourishing in the exhibit.
This is kind of a personal question, but maybe it applies to other people in the audience. So I'm a college student here in Boston, and I'm eventually hoping to go to graduate school and, like, I guess make it in the marine biology world, specifically with sharks and rays. Do both of you or either of you have advice on kind of how to get ahead of, I guess, other people?
Wow.
Stomp on them. No. Speaking of that, sorry.
Your mic's up.
Well, I can give you my opinion. John knows much better about the academic world in the USA. But really, the answer is show up. Put your hand up. Volunteer for everything. And when the opportunity comes, take it. And obviously the usual things, study hard. But you know, a really positive attitude on it. If you're with a team out working in the field, having a positive attitude and always being ready to help, it just is so valuable. And it doesn't take long before someone in the team who is a team leader or a PhD who is looking for students, or a postdoc is looking for students, you'll be noticed. And they'll say, I think I could use this person in some way. Okay. Hey, would you like to come and work in my lab? So, John.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I remember actually a couple years ago we had an IMAX lecture here that was sort of a tag team of a number of different shark biologists in the region. And that question came up. And I was really interested to hear the different answers from the different people we had on our so-called panel that were presenting. And I think one thing that I got out of that I didn't really think about was that at a very young age, you can get involved. You know, you can go to the outreach events, you can meet people in aquaria, you can meet people in the research and conservation world. At your age now, you know, I think it's definitely a time to get involved and volunteer, intern, things of that nature. It's never, you know, there's never more, you can always do more to get to know people and networking. And of course, like everything else, you know, really working great with people and getting a fundamental science career. I always say that you should, no matter what type of science you want to do or what type of field you want to get in the sciences and STEM in general, getting a solid fundamental scientific foundation is really important. So basic biology, basic chemistry, basic physics, calculus, all those classes you would normally take. Because you can always specialize later, but you need a really solid foundation at the front end. That's a great question. So the question was, when sharks bump into something with their rostrum, with their nose, they're usually very sensitive to that. Is there some sort of a chemical situation going on or something else that's governing why they're sensitive? Mark could definitely speak to that in captivity. I think, from my perspective, when I think about all the senses that sharks have, there's like a hierarchy where as the shark gets closer to the source that it's sensing, different senses come into play and trigger. Between smell, Mark talked about the electroreceptors, that's very close range. The very last sense that we have and sharks have is what? Touch. So it's called mechanoreception, where you actually physically, when you're physically touching something, that's your final sense. So sharks have that ability. They investigate things and they'll bump it. And they'll try to figure out, is that a food source? Is that something that I know or want? So sometimes that touch or feel, just like we use touch, is a vital sense. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's a great answer. I like particularly the electroreception is something really important to consider with sharks. And when you're designing an aquarium for sharks, you have to think about things like not having electrical wiring on the outside wall for lighting, not having pumps located too near the wall of the aquarium, not having any metals in the aquarium, because all of those things scramble the electrosense. And it's one of the things that they're very, very sensitive to. And so you have to be really careful of anything that might interrupt that sort of whole cloud of sensory capacity of the shark. And then to answer your question about bumping, of course, the endolarva oranzini, all those sensitive cells are very, very susceptible to damage if they bump something too quickly or too hard or repetitively. So you have to be very careful about that too. So one example of that is tiger sharks have been maintained in the aquarium for many years successfully. They are a relatively abnormal shark, but they do come in shore quite a lot as well. And you would think, well, it's important to have a smooth wall for this shark so it doesn't rub its nose up against the wall, it doesn't rub its fins up against the wall. It turns out that's actually not the case. It's actually much better for a tiger shark to have rocks jutting out from the walls of the aquarium because they're able to detect those more easily than a smooth surface, and they are more able to avoid the wall when it's rough in that way. And therefore the shark interacts with the wall less frequently and they flourish much better in that environment.
One more? Okay. Just gonna choose someone who has it. Go.
In regards to the hooks, when you have the metals on there, was there a specific metal that would work for all species, or is it species specific in regards to the metals that would be attached?
That's a really good question. So in terms of the electropositive metals or alloys being used as repellents, is there one metal or metal alloy that works for all sharks, or is it species specific? The closest understanding we have of that came from a researcher, a scientist, a really great one down at Florida Atlantic University, Steve Kajura. He did a study looking at different metal types. And he found that there's a trade-off. The metals, if you have a metal that reacts, and this is not when it's in its magnetic form, but in its pure form or its alloy form, it also erodes. So as it reacts, you're losing it. So the purpose of it is to be used in fisheries. You don't want something that's going to crumble away in one use. So he found that out of the metals that did work and didn't erode too quickly, that there were a couple of pure metals that worked better than others. I'm not recalling exactly which ones were good across the board, but there were some that worked really consistently and really, really well.
Is there a chemist in the house? Anywhere? Hand up, chemist. So I think the metals I saw were ND.
Well, there's neodymium, praseodymium, cerium. So those are some of the lanthanide rare earth metals that are used, usually in alloy form. But the magnets are incredibly powerful that have been used in these fisheries. You don't want to put your finger between the magnet and anything metal. You can imagine it's very painful. And two together you can't pull apart, or a person really can't pull apart without some sort of a tool. The problem, as you can imagine, in fisheries is that when you've got a lot of really powerful magnets in the same vicinity, everything's sticking to each other, and it's a logistical burden, so it's not very practical or feasible. But in recreational fisheries, where you just have one rod and reel out, it might be something that works. But in general, with recreational fisheries, if you catch a shark on a rod and reel, you can get it back in the water alive, and it can do pretty well if you don't keep it in the air too long, which is actually a huge problem. Sand tigers that we've talked about tonight are caught up and down the mid-Atlantic coast of the United States, and people see them, and even though they're very docile, as Mark said, they're really cool to look at. They've got big teeth. They're really quite magnificent. And when you catch them, you want to take pictures. So people drag them up on the beach. People keep them on the boat, take a bunch of shots, then release them. And it's that time and air that can be incredibly disruptive to their physiology, most disruptive. So.
Well, I see it's 8:30, so
we're here all night.
Totally outstayed our welcome. Thank you very much for being our hostages. I just wanted to end with this last image here. They say you never forget your first walking shark. Can't imagine why. This is part of our campaign for the Science of Sharks exhibit that John was talking about. Opening this week, I encourage you to come back to the aquarium, and in the lower level of the West Wing, you'll see some really cool exhibits that talk about the science of sharks.
A lot of people, most parents, have soothers, binkies, these little things you put in the kid's mouth and keeps them quiet. What does a kid do when you put one of these things in the mouth? Put it in the mouth, first thing you do is spit it out, right? So you put it back in. Kid spits it out again, right? It's a fun game, and they never tire of it. What do you do as a parent with this soother that's just bounced all around this dirty floor? So there was actually a study that showed that if you have two choices. You can go and wash it off, or you can just put it in your own mouth and shovel it back in the kid's mouth.